And you're live.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening if you happen to be in Duluth, Minnesota, where, as far as I know, Brian Freeman is. Although if you read this book, you might think that he was really in Iceland and just pretending to be in Duluth, Minnesota. And even though he tells me he has not been on site in Iceland, if you live in Duluth, I have a feeling that you can fake Iceland pretty well. Is that true?
That is true. I think there are some fairly similar situations between Minnesota and Iceland.
Right. Well, I've been to Iceland several times, so we'll get to that. But let me just say that this is your third. It is, isn't it?
It is. Yep, number 3.
Brian's third and the Robert Ludlum, Jason Bourne franchise. There's another very nice author who's writing the Treadstone.
Joshua Hood.
Yep. Joshua Hood, who's writing.
Good buddy of mine, terrific author. So.
He is. He's a really nice guy and a very good writer. And I think it's interesting that Ludlum can be split like that. You know, I mean, because Clancy is split like that between right. Tom Ryan Sr. and Tom Ryan Jr. And, you know, very interesting. Mark Cameron writing Sr. and currently Don Bentley writing Jr. and doing it well. But they probably have to coordinate more than you do. Do you have to actually read Joshua's books and coordinate with the Treadstone books, or are they so separate you don't really need to do that?
Yeah, I don't really need to do that. I read Josh's books just because I enjoy them, and I typically when a new Treadstone book comes out, I'll do a joint event with Josh so we can talk about the Bourne boys being back in action. But really, they kind of exist on parallel planes. So it's not like what's happening in the Bourne world is really necessarily impacting what Josh is doing with Treadstone. And then Simon Gervais is going to be starting up another wing of the Bourne franchise with a Blackbriar book that will be coming out next year.
I didn't know that. Wow. Yeah. It's interesting how these authors' works live on and on. I mean, there's a new author, actually, strangely enough, he was a Clancy author, but he is now a Cussler author, Mike Madden, who I think is very good. I loved the books that he wrote for Jack Ryan Jr. before Don Bentley. And he's now writing for Boyd Morrison in the Cussler franchise. He's writing the Oregon Files. And Jack DeBrule, who was writing, I'm trying to remember, he's now moved over into the historical Cussler. So it's kind of like a kaleidoscope. But what I find fascinating, then we have, the Parkers. We have Mike Lupica, who came in with Sonny Randall. Then he took over Jesse Stone. Now Ace is retired. So Mike is going to be writing Spencer and Jesse, and Allison Galen is going to come in and write Sonny. And
I did not know that. That's wonderful.
Yeah. But what's fascinating to me is that these characters are so iconic that were created by their original authors that they live on and that readers want to follow on to them. And authors like you can keep them going. Although part of your task is what? To modernize them somewhat, because I mean, they'd be frozen almost in historical fiction, some of them, if the original authors were still alive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, when you look back at Jason Bourne, I mean, Bourne was originally created, at this point, 42 years ago in the Bourne Identity. It came out in 1980. And the Bourne of that era was really a product of Vietnam and Watergate and the milieu that was going on at that time. If you tried to sort of take that Bourne and keep him going, I just don't think it would work. And that was really one of the first things that I talked about with Putnam when I took over the Bourne series, was that what I really wanted to do was be authentic to Ludlum's character and make him feel like a very authentic version of the Bourne that we meet in the Bourne Identity, but take that same character and drop him down into the modern era with all new plots and all new characters happening around him. So it essentially, these last 3 books have been sort of like a reboot of the entire series.
Well, they have been. And I think you're right that although the character doesn't have to age, I mean, I think readers, we all have this compact that nobody ever really gets older, because for one thing, you can't really have an action hero as an octogenarian.
Well, you wouldn't think so, but Liam Neeson seems to be testing that theory in his movies. So,
well, you're right. But I mean, generally speaking, readers, want them still to be kind of at their peak. Although Jason is what, in his 30s in this book, if I recall.
Mid 30s, and I think by the time that the Bourne Ultimatum came out, which was Ludlum's last Bourne novel, I think at that point the Bourne character in the book was well into his 40s. I mean, you could tell he was sort of aging at that point, and Ludlum was playing off that. But so I dialed him back when I rebooted him.
Right.
It's sort of like my Stride series. I mean, when I first wrote my first Jonathan Stride novel, Immoral, all the way back in 2005, Stride was quite a bit older than I was at that point. But now here we are 18 years later, and I'm quite a bit older than Stride. So it is kind of a nice trick these heroes can pull off.
Well, it really is. But as I said, I think readers are okay with it.
Exactly.
Let me mention before we go further down this line that that Brian, as ever, has been kind enough to autograph copies, and they are currently at the bookstore of the Bourne Inheritance. So you can certainly grab one if you want to. I think it's a really interesting cover too. I haven't seen this color combination all that often.
Yeah, they've done some really, really cool covers with these three books, and sort of same motif in each of them, but with a different main color driving it. So Bourne Evolution was sort of more orange, Bourne Treachery was blue, and now the Bourne Sacrifice has that green tone to it. I love the covers.
And speaking of what we were just talking about, here's a quote on the back of the book, which you could read for yourself, but I'll read it to you from Booklist. Freeman is an excellent storyteller and a fine writer. His two Bourne novels, the two before this one, and we hope there will be more, and luckily there is, take a much-loved character and breathe new life into him, giving him new energy and a renewed purpose. The action, that's Booklist, and Book Reporter says the action and intricate spy games are expertly executed by Freeman. The Bourne Treachery is a nonstop thrill ride that satisfies on every level and will leave you wanting more. So it's, critics are also embracing, nobody's being snide and saying, he's never aged in 42 years, or why are we still reading about Jason Bourne instead of some new character or something? And I agree with Publishers Weekly. This says series fans will look forward to more contributions to the Bourne franchise from this talented author. And in a way, Brian, this kind of reminds me, were you at the Edgars when they paid tribute to the woman who wrote most of the Nancy Drews for the Stratemeyer Syndicate? I'm blanking on her name.
I don't know. I was not. Yeah.
Yeah, they did a documentary about her, but the Stratemeyers they put together Nancy Drew and I think the Hardy Boys, although I might be wrong. But anyway, there were franchises of characters that had authors under a pseudonym writing them. And so if whoever this woman was, whose name I can't remember, stopped writing Nancy Drew, somebody else could come along and write Nancy Drew. The Hardy Boys, there's a really interesting book out that we have at the bookstore about the people or the person who wrote the early Hardy Boys and how that went. And I remember my mother had a collection called The Motor Girls Tour New England. And my very favorite language, I've never forgotten, I've quoted this before, because it was written in the early 1920s as part of a literary franchise. Scorching along at 22, they blew a shoe. which I just think it's poetic, but at the same time, when it was written, somebody driving a car at 22 miles an hour with one of those old tires, right, which were called shoes, would blow up, was a perfectly normal thing. Today,
particularly on the roads back then. Yeah. So I can remember a few years ago, I got an email from someone who was the grandson of the gentleman who had written many of the Hardy Boys novels under the pseudonym Franklin Dixon, and right, he was mentioning the absurdly low amount of money that his grandfather ever received for writing those books, and yet they entertained millions of children, including me. I was a huge Hardy Boys fan, a huge fan of Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators, which has sort of been forgotten over the years, but those were some of my first loves in the mystery genre when I was a kid. So
Oh, yeah. I remember Flash Gordon, for example, Flash Gordon and the evil Emperor Ming and his beautiful daughter and so forth. But, all of those people, they were on salary. I mean, they were
Yeah,
paid, kind of an agreed amount for whatever the literary output was. And how they did, and the royalties didn't enter into it, which, and not going into your arrangement, but that's not an uncommon arrangement for writing in these franchises, is
sure.
that you get paid a fixed sum, and whether the book, and I found out, Brian, it was really interesting, completely by accident, and in relation to a different Scandi noir author who came to the bookstore. A classmate of mine from Stanford asked if he could come to the event from Albuquerque. And I thought, yeah, great, why not? And it turned out that his wife, I think it was the translator of this visiting Scandinavian author. But then it came out that he was the translator of the girl with the dragon tattoo and the two others. And we were all agog. And I remember saying to him, well, that how fabulous, they became bestsellers that must have made you a fortune and all. And he said to me, no, he said, translators work, they're paid, if I remember right, he said they're paid by the word, but maybe it's just a fixed sum. But in other words, the fact that the girl with the dragon tattoo turned into a worldwide, whatever it is, did not enrich him
No,
beyond what he had been paid for doing the translation.
sure. And the same with audiobook narrators who typically get paid a fixed fee for the narration of the audiobook. Doesn't matter how successful it turns out to be. So
That's a good point too. So in other words, you can write, and there are ghostwriters, and ghostwriters write for fixed
sure.
sentence and all. So not every book is written by the author whose name's on the cover, and not every book is subject to the standard royalty
Sure.
contract. It all depends.
Yeah.
So I think it's fascinating. And it also, I might add, and then we'll leave this topic and move on to the actual book. It also depends on and the author who, in a case like this with Robert Ludlum, whether his literary estate allows people to continue the writing and under what conditions. So there's an editor at various houses, in your case, probably Tom Colgan at Putnam, who oversees these franchise operations and works with
Right.
the Ludlum estate or the Parker estate or whatever, and then the authors that are hired to continue. So, it's interesting. And you do a mix, don't you, Brian? Because some of your books are under normal author contract, royalty, whatever. And then, these are presumably somewhat different. How do you find that? Does having the salary kind of make you feel secure in terms of taking chances with work of your own?
Yeah, actually, that's absolutely true. I mean, I love the diversity of relationships I've been able to build over the last several years. I've done a lot of work with obviously the Ludlum estate in Putnam, and then I have a strong relationship with Blackstone, both for the
Right.
Stride novels and for standalones. I've done Audible originals, several books for Thomas and Mercer. My new thriller, I Remember You, for Thomas and Mercer just came out yesterday, in fact. So yeah, so and I think it enables me to take more risks with storytelling and try different things. Because I know that if a direction I pursue doesn't work out as well as I want it to, I've got other irons in the fire, which helps a lot. So and one of the things about doing the legacy work is there's sort of less, so many authors in these days feel like they have to carry so much of the marketing burden themselves. Well, one of the nice things about doing this legacy work with the estates is that brand value that goes along with the author name is still so strong out there that it takes a little bit of the marketing responsibility away from the author and brings it back on that brand, and that's great. I mean, it just means it gives me a little bit more breathing room in terms of my time to write. So yeah, so I've really enjoyed that.
Well, you're an amazingly prolific author. I mean, you're easily able to do 3 or 4 books a year, which not everybody, is able to do. But
Yeah, I know I'm only on track to do probably 2 books this year. I kind of feel like I'm slacking off. So
wow, you really are. I have I'm looking over at my shelf. I know I have an advanced reading copy for a book by you that comes out in November?
Yep, November 1st, The Zero Night is the 11th novel in the Jonathan Stride series. So after a couple of years, a hiatus, Stride is back in Duluth as of November 1st.
That is wonderful. But I totally missed, I mean, I don't often get material from Thomas and Mercer, which is the publishing arm of Amazon. So tell me about the book that came out yesterday, and then we'll talk about The Bourne Sacrifice.
Yeah, I Remember You is a new sort of out there thriller. The Publishers Weekly review said that fans of Michael Crichton will be entertained. I never thought that I would hear, that I would write sort of a Michael Crichton-esque medical thriller, but this one deals with the way that memories can be stored and restored in people's heads. And the concept is the idea that this young woman named Hallie Evers actually dies of a heart attack and then is revived. And yet when she wakes up in the hospital, she finds that she's having these strange memories that she can't associate with anything. So she sees people and they remind her of someone, but she doesn't know who these people are, and yet she remembers them, and she's so familiar with this city that she can know what's going on around the next corner, and yet she knows she's never been to this place before. So and then these dreams she's having, well, are they dreams or are they memories? Of course, end up revolving around murder. So it gets very dark and twisty from there.
Wow, well, I will certainly order one and order some for the bookstore. So I'm so glad you mentioned it, because it's really hard to keep up with, the enormous range of publishing that goes on. And as major publishers keep consolidating, so there are only 5 and potentially only 4, I think it's great that we're finding, independent publishers or smaller publishers like Blackstone, which is really very good.
Blackstone's terrific to work with.
Yeah, no, they're great. I like working with them a lot. And I like working with Thomas and Mercer, but I'm going to have a word with them about sending me more, because I tend only to react to the advanced reading copies I get,
Sure.
Because if I can't read it, there's nothing I can really say or talk about it. And so I tend to lose it. Anyway, let's talk about The Bourne Sacrifice, which has a tremendous scene at the beginning anyway, in Iceland. So what prompted you, because what's going on here? Jason, and there's a Russian assassin named Lenin, and Jason wants not to kill him so much as to find out from Lenin what Lenin knows about Jason's missing memories that happened because of a gunshot wound he endured to the head years ago, which basically erased his past.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about working with the Bourne franchise, is that Ludlum created such a rich backstory for Jason Bourne that is sort of the gift that keeps on giving in terms of storytelling. The fact that Bourne has lost his memory, it means there's always sort of this cloud, this ominous cloud that can kind of track him from book to book. And so in the Bourne Treachery, which was the previous of my Bourne novels, I very deliberately wanted to do some parallels with the Bourne Identity, where Bourne was tracking and pursuing the assassin known as Carlos. And so I wanted to kind of create my own assassin that had connections to Bourne. And so I created this assassin known as Lenin, who works for the Russians and yet plays with the name Lenin because he's sort of obsessed with the Beatles and tortures people to the soundtrack of Strawberry Fields Forever. And so I brought Lenin back in the Bourne Sacrifice because Bourne Lenin is supposedly a part of his past, and so Bourne wants to be able to find out what it is that Lenin knows about things from Bourne's past, and so it creates this wonderful cat and mouse game between the two of them, and so yeah, I like being able to sort of use Bourne's missing past as sort of the hook into new and different stories.
So your first Bourne, and the 3 that you've written, was called The Bourne Evolution. Yes. Which I think right there, indicates that. This one actually begins The Bourne Sacrifice with a young woman who arrives in Washington, D.C. and is directed or taking directions towards a meeting but it doesn't go well for her.
It does not. No. And I always love those little prologues, because Ludlum did the same thing, that very action oriented prologue that kind of grabs the reader by the throat and pulls you into the book. And then we have this wonderful set piece in Iceland, where Bourne and Lennon are sort of stalking each other, and they wind up in this remote cottage in the Icelandic wilderness near the hills. And I wanted to find this remote landscape, and one of the things that was always very entertaining about the Bourne novels was the use of international settings, and so I love to be able to kind of start the books in a different, interesting locale. So in the Bourne Treachery, the opening scene takes place in Tallinn in Estonia, and now here we are in the remote countryside in Iceland. So yeah, that's kind of how things get started. And one of the things that I really wanted to do with the Bourne Sacrifice, and that I really appreciate the Ludlum estate and Putnam letting me do, is that one of the Ludlum books that I absolutely loved, it was the first Ludlum book I ever read when I was a teenager, was the Chancellor manuscript. And in fact, I can still remember buying the Chancellor manuscript at Long's drugstore in California when I was probably 15 years old, and walking out with my face buried in the book. And I love the Chancellor manuscript. It's about this writer named Peter Chancellor, very Ludlum-esque. He writes about conspiracies. He uses a lot of exclamation points. And it's about the idea that maybe J. Edgar Hoover was actually murdered in order to get his files. And so I thought, oh, it would just be wonderful if we could find a way to bring Peter Chancellor and echoes of the Chancellor manuscript into the Bourne franchise. And so that was what I did in the Bourne Sacrifice. So Ludlum fans and aficionados, I think we'll have a lot of fun meeting Peter Chancellor again in the Bourne Sacrifice. And I was a little nervous that whether they would let me do it, because I wasn't sure if there would be any IP issues in terms of using a character from another series and bringing, or not a series, but a standalone, and bringing that character into the Bourne franchise. But they must have run it past their lawyers and got the green light, because nobody raised any red flags with me.
Well, it was a standalone. I mean, I think the key to it is that if it was a standalone, then you weren't going to run into continuity issues or, other sorts of problems. I think you would have had a much harder time if you had searched for a different series character. What do you think drove Ludlum to write, the different sorts of books that he did? Because obviously he wrote some, more than one series, or he wrote standalones. How many books did he write? I don't even know.
Oh, must have been a couple dozen, I think. I don't have an exact count, but most of them were standalones. I'm trying to remember if he did any series books other than the Bourne franchise.
Well, it looks to me
there may have been a couple characters that crossed.
No, and I'm looking at the front of the book where Putnam helpfully tells us what he actually did. Yep. He wrote, well, that's not true. Actually, the Covert One series or Covert One series has
but I don't think he wrote
all different authors. So
I was going to say, I don't think he wrote any of those, did he? So.
Nope. And then the Jansen series has two different authors, Douglas Corleone and Paul Garrison. There are three of those. And then the Bourne series, he wrote what looks like just three of them.
The
Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, and the Bourne Ultimatum. And then Eric Van Lustbader wrote a whole slew of them, and now you've written three.
Right.
And then Joshua Hood is writing the Treadstone series, which is another spinoff. But then they have, let me count here, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23 standalones.
Yeah.
Plus the three Bourne novels. So basically, and he wrote one called the Jansen Directive. So 24, so basically 27 published works. And so out of these, I think, standalones comes some of these other spin-off books. I mean, he's obviously, it's been easy to mine the work that he did to create these ongoing kind of, so I
Yeah, well,
I admit that I've never read one of the covert ones or the
yeah,
Johnsons, so I don't really know whether those characters sprang up out of standalones that Ludlum wrote or whether they've been created out of whole cloth. But I'm
sure.
kind of thinking they must be rooted in something that he wrote.
Uh, there usually there's some tie. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the Treadstone series that Josh is writing is based on this organization that was
Yeah.
sort of led to the creation of Bourne, and the same thing with Simon and the Blackbriar series. I think there's a reference to Blackbriar in the Bourne Ultimatum. But yeah, it's I think one of the things that gives Ludlum novels some rich relevance, particularly these days, is that Ludlum was writing at a very interesting time in the 70s and 80s when again you were coming out of the Vietnam and Watergate eras. There was a lot of distrust of government. There was a lot of conspiracy thinking, a lot of sort of disruption in society, and honestly taking over the Bourne series a couple of years ago with the Bourne Evolution. I felt like there were a lot of interesting parallels between where the world is today and where Ludlum was back writing in the 70s and 80s, and so it felt like rich ground to be able to take this character who emerged out of a very basic just trust of the government or agency that was running him, and put him down into a new era where there's simply new conspiracies and new distrust, and people don't know what's actually going on around them. And I've tried to sort of play off those things in each of the novels and really sort of give that kind of ripped from the headlines feel to the plots. And so in the Bourne Sacrifice, I'm dealing a lot with the idea of disinformation and misinformation and cancel culture and sort of playing off those themes that are things that are coming up in the newspaper and on TV day after day. Well, I'm kind of taking those things to the dramatic extreme and asking that same question of, well, can you really trust what's being put on the screen in front of you because you don't know who's pulling the strings, and that kind of underlies the plot of the Bourne Sacrifice.
Absolutely. The world is really unstable at the moment. And there's, a lot of anger and a lot of distrust, as you say. So it's an interesting time to be writing a thriller. I mean, the Bourne Sacrifice, as you point out, these are global stories. And so we're in Washington, and at some point we're in New York, and we're in Iceland and other places. But one of the keys to Jason Bourne in the story, it's kind of the Superman thing, which is to say, if anybody knows he's really mild-mannered Clark Kent reporter, then the people around Clark Kent reporter are in constant danger. And so we have that problem with Jason and Abby Laurent, or Laurent, however you want to pronounce it. I call her Laurent, but
That's what I do too. Yeah.
Good. It's the French, Laurent.
And she's French Canadian, so.
Yeah, but anyway, Abby is a big part of this, and Jason and she met 2 years ago when this story takes place in Quebec, I think it is, and she is in love with him, but he keeps repulsing her because he's terrified that being close to him rather, will put her in danger. And it turns out that he's entirely right. That is what's going to happen. So Abby is a character in this, a big player, and what's her jeopardy may be even more acute than Jason, because we do really, among all the other bonds or covenants we make with the author in reading a series like this, is no matter how terrible it is, Jason is going to survive. I mean, otherwise there can't be book 4. But everybody else can be at risk.
Yes,
and Jason has had at least 2 other interests, female interests, and so forth. Though, there's no guarantee that Abby is going to come out of any of these books still with us.
Yeah. You just never know where the body count will take you in these things, but you can count on the fact that Bourne will live on, absolutely. But it's and I think that's an interesting take on Bourne. I mean, if for the movie fans that know Bourne primarily through the Matt Damon movies, I think what you see of Bourne in the movie version is this more laconic, cynical kind of character sort of the cold killer, doesn't have a lot of emotions. I mean, you look at the Bourne Ultimatum, and I think Matt Damon hardly has 6 lines of dialogue in the whole movie. I mean, it's just all kind of this strong silent type. And yet that's really not the character that Ludlum created. I mean, if you go back to the 3 Ludlum novels, it's Bourne's relationship with his wife Marie Saint Jacques that is the underpinning of that series and of who Bourne is as a hero and as a character. And that was what I really wanted to bring back in my take on this series, is that sort of vulnerability that Bourne has. I mean, this is really his Achilles heel, that he needs a relationship in his life, and yet he kind of pushes the people he loves away because he's afraid that them being close to him will result in danger to them. And as you say, he's absolutely right about that. But that dynamic is very much at the heart of my take on the series, because I wanted to capture that need Bourne has for someone in his life, even though given the nature of who he is, it makes it very hard to build those kinds of relationships.
Well, but that's a problem that comes up very often with action heroes. I mean, James Salas's novel Drive, Greg Hurwitz writing The Nowhere Man, it comes up frequently that I'm not sure that readers can fully bond with a character who has no human connections, who really is a killing machine and has no, attachments. And also, when you write a series and you introduce other characters, readers get attached to the other characters. And, while they are all in jeopardy as compared to the hero, I think it's hard for readers to let them go. And, you've got a scene, I'm on page 248 here, and you're writing a scene. And now Abby was in the crosshairs too. Abby, where are you? He murmured into the microphone. Keep your voice down, but give me your location. There are 2 killers on the campus close by, blah, blah. Jason waited. There was no response. Abby, where are you? Nothing. Abby! He cursed out loud and adrenaline surged through him. So, I don't know that these guys can always be powered by going after, let's say, Lenin, the evil Russian assassin. Part of the motivation may be necessarily a need to protect somebody, not just, fill a mission. Or, I mean, it's interesting that Brad Thor, I'm trying to remember, this was his 21st Scott Harbath. And 2 books ago, he introduced a woman we call the Norwegian Ninja, whom I really like. And that has been a continuing relationship in books 19 and 20. And in 21, she's not there, but she is there. She's off stage. And I don't know that she'll survive, because not everybody around Scott survives. But again, a need to kind of create a bond, somebody that he cares about.
Yeah, and that's that. And what makes it, of course, the interesting creative challenge is it's not like any of these characters can live happily ever after. I mean, they're always going to have terrible things going on around them, and so you can't really give them sort of long-term happiness in a relationship.
Right. Well, there's always going to be the next mission, because that's what powers these books. And every time there's a new mission, they're
right. Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things that Josh is doing with the Treadstone series, is that Adam Hayes, his hero, is married and has a child, and that's at the center of his life, and that's a really interesting dynamic in the thriller world. Can you have sort of this happily married hero, and how does that play into the the plots of future books?
Well, absolutely, and it may also form what kind of missions that guy can go on. I mean,
sure. And it creates new vulnerabilities for him as well.
Yeah, absolutely true. So, and with so much in the way of cybercrime and computer warfare and so forth, I suppose you could resolve that in part by giving a guy not so much action in the field, but more of a cyber kind of where presumably wife and children would be left at home. So I don't know. I mean, it's, we're an evolving time. We've gone from, every thriller being in the Middle East sandbox to, evolving theaters. I mean, there've been a couple about China. Brad's new book was about India, which I thought the Indian-Chinese conflict. Daniel Silva has ranged around, over Europe and so forth. And right now the whole world is so unstable. You can go practically anywhere.
Yeah, and that's always the interesting balance too, is to what extent do you reflect what's really going on in the world, and to what extent do you feel like people are looking to your books to escape, and they don't want
Right.
to sort of, have the fears and sort of nauseating reality of the world kind of thrust down their face. They're looking for these books to get away from all that. It's sort of like people, have asked me at reader events, oh, are you gonna put COVID in your books? And my attitude is, I'd like to stay 5 miles away from that, because I think we've all had that in our faces for so long. The last thing we want to do is have it dominating our entertainment.
Well, you're absolutely right, Brian. And of course, the other thing is that the more you try to mirror reality in the thriller, the better chance that between the time you finish the book and the time it publishes, that reality will have changed and your book will be dated before it ever gets out. Somebody told me years ago, for example, that he makes a point never to put a specific sum of money into a book, like for a tournament prize or something, because it will date a book so quickly.
Right.
And I think that's a real consideration you have to keep in mind. Well, I'm glad
and of
to
course,
see.
sometimes it goes the other way, and you just sort of luck out in terms of timing. One of my recent Stride novels, Alter Ego, which was about 3-4 years ago, it dealt with this famous actor who was suspected of sexual harassment, and who was actually playing Stride in a movie based on one of Stride's cases. And I turned in the book, and I think it was about 3 weeks after that the whole Harvey Weinstein thing broke open in the press, and the whole Me Too generation began. And my editor was calling up asking, well, did you know something? Because this seems so timely. So I was like, no, this was pure happenstance. So.
Well, sometimes it works for you and sometimes it works against you. But I have to say, this is a really excellent time for historical fiction.
That's true.
I mean, for one thing, historical fiction is more of an escape, because we all know, we know how it came out. So it eliminates a lot of uncertainties. And for another, for the author, since these events have already happened, you can't be caught totally.
Sure. Well, and in detective novels, it's a lot easier going back to a time when the police didn't have such advanced technology for tracking down criminals. All this DNA things, and it's awfully hard to escape the law these days, and so it's kind of fun to go back and write in a time when it was a lot easier for criminals to slip away.
Well, you're absolutely right. And of course, today everybody's a witness because everybody has a phone. So the old conundrum of
cell phones are the bane of thriller writers' existence. You really want to find some place where there's no signal. So.
I think cell phones are a bane all the way around, frankly. And which of us can actually? I realized the other day, having just come back from a 3-week vacation, it's impossible to travel if you don't have a cell phone. It's just impossible. You certainly can't fly if you don't have a cell phone. And in point of fact, since I might see you at VoucherCon in Minneapolis, you can't go to a convention at the moment because the protocols require you to have a cell phone so you can upload your vaccination card and do all kinds of things. So we've all become really dependent on it. Let's see what our readers have to say. I don't think there's much more we can actually say about the Bourne sacrifice without ruining the story. So Jacob, come join us and let us know if there are any comments that you have or anybody watching might have. Has to press the button. There we go.
Hey, yeah, I got lots of questions. How are you doing on time, Barbara?
Fine.
Okay, excellent. All right, Brian, we got some questions from Facebook.
Okay.
This one's from Stefania. How much do you feel the weight of a legacy left behind by another author, or is it harder to write a book like this or your own stories, in your opinion?
Stefania is from Italy, Brian. She's a faithful fan that lives in Genoa, I think it is. Anyway.
That's
Well,
wonderful. Well,
and
I have just amazing Italian fans. They are just fantastic, and they are so enthusiastic about the books. And one of the great sadnesses of my career is that Marcia and I have not had a chance yet to make it over to Italy, but we are bound and determined to get there to meet so many of our Italian fans. That's a great question too, and it's true. I mean, when I first took over the Bourne franchise, I mean, my reaction was, oh my God. And then my next reaction was, oh my God. Because the idea of stepping into the shoes of a giant of the thriller genre like Ludlum is very intimidating. And then you combine that with taking over such a classic, iconic character like Jason Bourne, and it puts a lot of pressure on you as a storyteller. And for me, all I could do was just back up and say, you know what, this is one of the most amazing opportunities of my career. You just have to enjoy it. And literally, the first two words I wrote on my whiteboard when I was starting the Bourne Evolution, my first Bourne novel, were "have fun." And honestly, that's what I've done. I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed writing the Bourne novels. They are just a lot of fun to put together, and they're very entertaining. They're very different from my books. Which is harder, which is easier. I'm not sure I can put it in terms of difficulty, because it doesn't matter how many books you write. It's always a very difficult, challenging, intense kind of process. But I think what's different about the Bourne novels is that they're very action oriented, very adrenaline oriented, and so I feel myself sort of propelled along with the narrative. My books tend to be more inside the head, psychological, intimate, emotional, and so they're very psychologically intense for me to write, and I get really engaged in the stories and the characters. They're very it becomes a very difficult emotional ride for me, and I get to the toward the end, and I've got tears running down my face. So it's just a very different experience writing the Bourne novels. Not easier or harder than my own books, but I think it's sort of more of an adrenaline experience than it is with my own novels.
All right. There's a question from Mike, which is kind of related to what you've already talked about. But he said, do you enjoy doing the standalones more, or the series, or what's your preference?
Yeah, that's another great question. Because I've done a lot of series work. I've got soon to be 11 books in my Jonathan Stride series set in Duluth. The Zero Night will be the next novel coming out on November 1st. I've got obviously the Bourne series. I've got a Frost Easton series, and yet I've been writing multiple standalones over the last several years. I don't know that I prefer one over the other, but they are very different creative experiences and very different emotional experiences as well. I feel more empowered to take storytelling risks with my standalones and my characters. I can kind of push the envelope with the standalones because it's all contained within that novel. Whereas I think with the series books, you sort of have to stay within the guidelines of the characters that you've created, and that creates sort of more of a path in which you have to follow. Emotionally, it's very different because when I'm writing a Stride novel, even if it may be, I know it may be a couple years before I get back to Stride again, I always know he's still out there. He's kind of still waiting for his time on stage. So when I close the book on a new Stride novel, it doesn't have that sense of loss or sadness, which I feel with standalones, because in the course of writing a standalone, I get very, very caught up in the experience of those characters. And when I get to the end of a standalone, I know I'm kind of setting them free, and I'm not going to meet those characters again. And there's a real grief that goes along with that. So so very, very different kind of experiences for me as the author in standalones versus series books.
Alrighty. This one's also from Stefania. She asks, where do you get your inspiration from for your characters? Because obviously you're not surrounded by, assassins and CIA operatives all day. So do you read a lot of
Sure he
non?
is. You have no
Right?
idea. Duluth, Minnesota is an absolute hotbed.
Oh, yeah. Sure, I heard about it. No, did you read a lot of nonfiction or real spy stories to get your inspirations, or do you have a creative character, I don't know, method of thinking of?
Yeah, that where do the ideas come from? They come from a lot of different places, and again, it varies a little bit depending on the nature of a series book versus a standalone or a different kind of series like Bourne. For example, if I'm writing a stride novel it's a long-standing series, a character that I've known for years and years. Typically, when I'm thinking about a stride novel, I'm not thinking about the plot first. I'm thinking about where the characters in the series are in terms of their emotional development and what's been happening in their lives. What are the things, where are they going next as people? What are the issues in their lives that they haven't dealt with, that are going to be creating conflict for them? And then I start to build a plot around that allows that conflict to sort of take full life. So for example, in the Zero Night, the new Stride novel on November 1st, I knew that Stride's wife, Serena, who is also a detective, has always dealt with alcoholism in her life and had come out of an abusive childhood where her mother was an abusive mother to her, and she hadn't dealt with her mother in years and years. I was thinking about Serena and feeling that whenever Serena's mother passed away, that was going to create a big emotional crisis in her life. And so that ultimately became the centerpiece of the Zero Night, that Serena's mother passes away and she kind of goes off the rails as a result of that. And I built the plot around a mystery that would sort of force her to confront the things that were going on as a result of that grief and the unresolved issues she had from her childhood. So that's kind of where a series book comes from. Looking at something like the Bourne novels, it's a little bit different. I mean, I'm certainly looking at where Bourne is as a character, and I want Bourne to continue to grow and evolve. I don't think you can take any character, even a character as iconic as Jason Bourne, and simply have him remain static and drop him down and have new action going on around him. I think readers are going to get bored with that real fast. I think ultimately the character needs to continue to grow and change and react to the circumstances around him. So I'm thinking about the relationships that I've established for Bourne with Abby Laurent and with Nova, the other agent that's in his life, and I'm thinking about how that's going to affect where he is going forward. Then I start layering in current events and plots, and yeah, sometimes I read a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of history. I read spy stories, real spy stories, and it sort of inspires me to think about things. For example, looking at the Bourne treachery, I had read a book. I think it was The Spy and the Traitor by Ben McIntyre, and it dealt with a Russian spy who was evacuated out of Russia by the Brits, and so I was thinking about that and created my own kind of Russian spy that needed to be evacuated, and I put Bourne in the center of that, and that was how the sort of the plot began to take shape for the Bourne treachery. And in the Bourne sacrifice, I was thinking again about sort of what's going on in the world, and what are the sorts of issues that are going to leave readers wondering what's happening, and what can I trust and what can I believe, and so I started dealing with these media conspiracies and the idea of misinformation and cancel culture, and so I decided to sort of drop Bourne and his issues with Abby right down in the middle of this very sort of timely kind of plot. So it's a combination. The plots are being driven, the ideas are being driven by the characters, and yet then they're also being driven by sort of what's going on in the world.
I've been working with Brian for many, many years, and I have the utmost respect for his ability to play with imaginary friends, different groups of imaginary friends, all at the same time. You are truly one of the most articulate authors about, you have this mind trap memory for for the different things that you do, and you never seem to confuse them.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. And the more stories and characters I tell, the more it's like, yeah, I gotta make sure I keep these things straight. So.
Well, somehow you do without complicated charts and timelines and so forth. I think Brian, he's probably really an autodidact or, weird form of Asperger's or some damn thing that goes on in your head. I apologize for looking at my phone. I have stranded an author at a hotel because I completely forgot I was supposed to book a room for him. So I got this stream of like urgent emails. What are we going to do with poor Peter, which I have now fixed, but oh dear. Anyway, Jason, carry on. Are there any more questions? Jacob, sorry, any more questions?
Yeah, that Bourne, he just gets in the way of everything. So.
Yeah, are there any continuity between your books and Eric's novels, or
No.
No.
Okay. Yeah, no, and that was a very deliberate decision that I talked about with Putnam, that there had been so many iterations of Bourne over the years. I mean, you had Ludlum's original novels, you had the Matt Damon movies, and then all of Eric's books. I was like, I just don't think you can try to build on what came before in terms of plots or themes or characters. I think what you have to do is be true to Bourne as a character in terms of what Ludlum created, but then sort of reboot the series so that you don't need to have experienced any of those things before. So really, the Bourne evolution starts the series totally fresh. It doesn't have any connection to any version of Bourne that came before, other than the fact that I think fans of Ludlum and the Bourne identity will recognize, this Bourne character is very authentic to the man that Ludlum created.
Okay, but let's keep in mind that Jason Bourne is a person whose past, basically his identity was erased. And therefore it's easier to do that than it will be, let's say, as I mentioned him earlier, Mike Lupica can't take Spencer and suddenly give him, throw Susan out the window and all the rest of it and start over again.
Yes,
so,
Bourne is a little bit of a tabula rasa, which does help.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and of course, last question, any more Jason Bourne?
Yes, I am charging along on the 4th Bourne novel, which will actually be called The Bourne Defiance. And I will say that The Bourne Sacrifice, that was the fastest book I have ever written in my life. It was due as of January 31st. And as of first week in December, I think I had written 20,000 words. So I wrote 80,000 words between the beginning of December and mid-January. I've never had a pace like that before, but it actually worked really well for the propulsive nature of a Bourne story. But I also sort of swore to myself I was never going to face that cliff again. So I'm already 90% of the way through The Bourne Defiance. It's still not due till the end of January, but honestly, I'll have the first draft done by the end of the month.
You must have a very forgiving family, darling, if they let you do that during the holidays.
Yes, yeah, throw in the holidays. That was definitely an interesting period.
I can imagine that. So are you going to come see us with Jonathan Stride? What do we have to do to pry you loose from Duluth? Try it again. Loose from Duluth.
Yes, yeah. I've got to talk to Blackstone about that. Yeah, because it's definitely time to be able to be there in person, and I can't wait for the Zero Night to come out. I had an advanced reader who said one of the big crime bloggers, and she said it's her favorite Stride novel. I love to hear that.
Well, let me talk to them as well. I mean, November is a good time to leave Duluth for Scottsdale.
That's certainly true.
It is true. Right. Well, thank you, everybody, for watching us this afternoon and for your questions. And I want to thank Jacob for stepping in, and Patrick's on vacation, but I think it's great that Jacob and Ian are participating in our programs. We do have autographed copies, again, as I mentioned, of The Bourne Sacrifice. So feel free to order one before we run out. Anyway, Brian, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody.
So
Great to talk to you again.
You too, dear. Always is a pleasure. Good night.
Bye-bye.